be seated. Elle va venir tout de suite sur... Je commence. Nous allons commencer cette deuxième séance plénière.
We are about to kick off the second plenary,
Sur la réforme féministe,
which is about feminist reform of international financial architecture.
Prenez vos sièges, s'il vous plaît, nous allons commencer. Merci. Vous pouvez vous rapprocher. You can come up to the front of the room. En introduction de cette...
So by way of introduction to the second plenary,
Nous avons l'honneur d'accueillir
it's our honor and privilege to welcome
ministre déléguée
Elena Corobra,
aux partenariats
who
internationaux et
is
Merci de l'accueillir.
Delegate Minister for Francophonia,
Monsieur le vice-ministre, Madame la
Vice
secrétaire
Minister,
d'État
Secretaries
parlementaire,
of State, Members of Parliament, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, the protocols observed, dear Delphine, all panelists, dear friends.
une joie d'être
It's
avec vous cet après-midi.
delightful for me to be with you this afternoon as a delegate minister in charge of Francophonia and French nationals abroad and international partnership, here to talk about this subject that I think is so important, feminist foreign policies. Before
Remercier très chaleureusement
I get down to the nitty-gritty, I'd like to thank Mexico and Maria Teresa for
et l'Allemagne
leading everything up to now, along with Netherlands and Germany, who are joining us in this combat for
c'est important.
girls and women and genders. Very important word.
Des Nations Unies,
Now, of course, all of this goes through the United Nations, international organizations, development organization, but also contributions from civil society organizations that I commend and congratulate warmly. Before I go into the details, because I will tell you about what France is doing in terms of international financial architecture, the topic of this plenary, I want to say something in general, an observation that we've all made, I'm sure, which is that there's an ill wind blowing, an ill tempest, in fact, affecting women's rights. Mr. Barrow said in his opening speech, there is a resurgence of retrograde, reactionary, anti-rights, anti-women's and girls' rights, masculinistic movements that mock us, that ignore us, or
tellement légitime pour une forme de communautarisme.
say that these legitimate comebacks are a form of communitarism. And this is alarming.
Nuisent et que les soutiens financiers
The funding for women's rights is
d'échelle inversée, une offensive
declining, and that for anti-rights is increasing. So this means that we have to roll out these efforts everywhere.
acteurs qui au mieux
And we see that there are some who say nothing and others who support this anti-rights movement. So what can we do in this rollback of rights, which reminds us of the darkest times? I think we have a shared conviction, shared by you here this afternoon, namely that
qui nous arrive.
there's no time to pussyfoot. We know what's going on, and we have to go onto the offensive.
Ce temps de l'action qui est là et la France par cette conférence que nous
Now is the time for action, and France, bringing you here together, wants to
de cette grande cause.
gather all your forces around this great cause of gender equality. Our combat is clear. We have to re-establish primacy of international law, defend gender equality, and combat all these forms of regression that we have seen, that we have roundtables on. We have said, yes, it's there. Now we have to do something about it. And this is not just lip service. It goes through
Menée par des moments clés de mobilisation.
concrete policies.
La France a fait partie
Backed by mobilization, France is one of the first countries that adopted
dans cette salle
FFP, and I know there are other diplomats in the world who have done the same.
Au sommet G7 de Biarritz et encouragé par le
In the Biarritz summit and encouraged by the Equality Forum that we also co-organized, there have been other things done. In particular, a support fund for feminist organization that has funded 140 organizations in 75 countries, or there's also the Center for Dialogue concerning safe abortion, concerning Western African countries, where we've tried to change certain parts of the law. And in addition to that, since March of this year, there's been a consolidated international strategy that will be our North Star in this process. And all this relates to what we have done with the 200 actors in France and abroad for this FFP. And the paradigm has now changed. All the domains of international and European action by France, including what our consulates do, which I oversee in my position as Minister for French National Support, all of that should lead into generally feminist foreign policy. And it's by listening to all that our strategy will be implemented, involving international organization, donors, the private sector, academia, and philanthropic partners. So our priority is gender equality in all our policies. And what we want to do is promote a climate environmental action that is feminist, so as to defend women's rights in the world of IA and the digital space. Women are everywhere and their rights are vulnerable everywhere, so we need to defend them everywhere, forcefully and in an offensive way. So there will be feminist policies in our trade and economic policies because with these crises, we have to see that women can be involved in response to armed conflict. For example, the first laboratory for sharing best practices online, so that gender inequality does not flourish in the cyberspace, as we know. There's the Francophone Feminist Alliance, which speaks up for important causes in multilateral fora. So, ladies and gentlemen, friends, I want to say something about how we need to mobilize in terms of sexual and reproductive health rights. We are the first country, 8th of March last year, to put the right to abortion in our constitution. I remember how proud I was to lead that combat. It wasn't just symbolic, because we see how much these sexual and reproductive health rights are being threatened. So it's important to create those sanctuaries. And we're doing this to defend sexual and reproductive health rights abroad, because we want a feminist approach there. So it's very simple, guaranteeing rights, the rights of all women to control their bodies and gender equality. These are non-negotiable. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, because I know we've had already some fascinating discussions. I want to say something about financial architecture of spiritual equality, because it's all about money at the end of the day, because you can see there's a growing support for policies that are retrograde, anti-rates, against what we want, and there's a declining finance for the counter movement. So we need to make sure that money is used efficiently. So France has taken steps to reform international architecture so that these international funding sources can respond better to the challenges of our century. I've just come back from the annual meeting of the World Bank International Fund meetings, where we expressed the position of France. That will also be expressed next year at the G7 in Evian. And we've talked about gender and environmental priorities, which are not always shared, to put it mildly, by our partners. But we need an approach that is fair and inclusive, and you can't be inclusive if you leave out half of mankind. So our discussion today will identify the best ways of including gender equality in these major actions going forward, and it will also be important in the preparation of the G7. It's important for all of us to work together to push back these retrograde attacks, trying to reverse the progress of the last 50 years. So we can't just sit back and take it. We shouldn't be discouraged. We can't just say, oh, that's it, nothing we can do. We have to fight, firstly for us, for our children. I'm thinking of my 9-year-old daughter here. I want to see her live in a world where she will have at least as many rights as me, and I hope maybe even more. For our boys, too, for our societies in general, because women's rights is not about girls and women. It concerns everybody, and for ourselves. So being appointed to this position as a minister, as a woman, so as an ambassador, a researcher, and we know there are so many others. You know, there's a feminist who says, I've never heard men ask how you can strike a work-life balance. So why should women have to? I want to end on a note to more for the men in the room. They've come a long way, Guillaume and many others, and I think that's vital. I think that's a struggle that we're in together. It's a combat that France has focused on, and we have to make sure we have the resources to fight for gender equality, because there's no harmonious development without it. And so we have to make sure that gender is mainstreamed in the reform of financial architecture I was talking about. So that's what I want to leave you as a message. Let's work together and make sure that our voices can make a difference to global decisions, because we have a huge responsibility, and that's not just empty words. We know what's happening. We know the challenges we are facing. Women and girls around the world are looking at us. We can act, and you can count on me and my ministry to take this fight forward. Thank you.
Merci. J'appelle maintenant les panélistes sur scène, please. Panelists, can you come on stage with me? Je serai la modératrice de cette...
I will be the moderator for this next session.
Bonjour, bonsoir. Merci.
Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for attending this session, the second plenary session dedicated to reforming the feminist funding of international relations. Now, before delving into the discussion, the action program of Addis Ababa 2015, the Paris Summit for a new financial pact in 2023, and the fourth conferences for development in June last, focused on the need for reforming the international financial architecture to benefit a sustainable development. When the world is going through multiple crises, climatic, sanitary, economic, etc., our financial architecture no longer meets the challenges of the 21st century. It is very often unfair, unequal, and blind to gender inequalities, when gender equality is an absolute need as a lever for economic growth and a condition for sustainable development. and effective sustainable development, including women in the international economic cycle, allows them to participate in the system. It's the only way of meeting sustainable development goals. We know that gender inequalities have an economic cost. According to UN, women investing in women and girls would generate $4,000 million in the economy between now and 2030. And in view of that, states and international organizations, development banks, and feminist organizations of society should mobilize themselves. But now, gender equality, what we're looking at today, is not very often mentioned in international conferences focusing on finance and funding. So what do we do to reform the system and make sure that reforming the architecture of the financial system be more feminist? How can we ensure that funding for sustainable development includes gender equality? How can we mobilize partners who are both structuring and innovating? So on this panel, I am very happy to be able to welcome Fabrizia Lapecorella, Secretary General OECD, Minister Bärbel Koffler, the Secretary of State with the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, Raquel Lagunas de Lamo, Director of Gender Development, excuse me, Faye Macheke, Deputy Director of AIWID, and the gentleman, Bertrand Velkener, Director of the French Development Agency and representative of the network called Finance en commun, Finances in Common, Edwin Collet, and the Foreign Ministry of the Netherlands. We're going to start with you, Madam Deputy Secretary General at the OECD. You're a specialist of international financial policies, their architectures, and the means for them to ensure better inclusiveness. During the past few years, public development aid has changed a lot, as shown by the OECD documents. But how can we guarantee that the reshaping of international funding includes gender equality?
I'm going to speak English, if you don't mind. And good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. Well, let me to respond to your question. Let me start on a positive note. Over the last decade, the volume and share of ODA, including gender equality as a priority, have increased. The latest OECD data show that for the biennium 2022-2023, the Development Assistance Committee members integrated gender equality objectives in 46% of their bilateral allocable ODA, meaning $72 billion out of $156 billion on average per year, up by 2 percentage points from 44% in 2020-2021. But. Overall, ODA levels are currently under pressure. Preliminary OECD data shows that overall ODA dropped by 9% in 2024, and projections indicate a further drop from 9% to 17% in 2025. This will directly impact the level of development financing for gender equality. In this context, ensuring that gender equality is safeguarded and prioritized in development financing requires commitments and concerted actions at local and global levels between public and private actors, including governments, multilateral financing institutions, and other actors such as foundations and civil society organizations. Now, steps towards this goal are already being taken. For example, in the Development Assistance Committee recommendation on gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, the recommendation that was adopted last year an important recommendation that was adopted last year in May 2024, the members members of the committee committed to promoting diverse forms of finance for gender equality, including ODA, but also blended finance, bonds, guarantees, and private investment. The OECD is contributing to these efforts by providing data and analysis to help integrate gender equality in development financing and to shape global processes, such as the FFD4, that you mentioned before, and the G7 and the G20. Now, to respond to the question on where there is room for maneuver, this year, in March, the OECD launched the Dashboard on Development Finance for Gender Equality. This is a tool that can help identify the areas where there is room for maneuver or where further action may be required to integrate gender equality in development financing. The tool does so by tracking development finance across sectors like health and trade, across thematic areas such as gender-based violence, and the tool tracks development finance to development partners, partner countries, as well as to women's rights organizations and feminist movements. For next year, the OECD is preparing a report on financing for gender equality that will look at all types of financing and at how partnerships across actors can optimize and increase finance for gender equality. But our analysis show that to advance and safeguard gender equality fully in the international financial architecture, actions must also be taken to enable women's equal participation in the global economy more broadly. This is the message, looking beyond development finance. This can entail, among other actions, facilitating access and participation of women businesses in international trade, enhancing the impact of foreign direct investment on gender equality, as well as ensuring that these objectives are reflected in global processes such as the G7 and the G20. Now, in support of these efforts, the OECD continues to provide evidence-based advice on, for instance, on how trade policies can promote women's business to compete in international markets through the OECD Trade and Gender Framework Analysis, or on how foreign direct investment can support gender equality through the OECD Foreign Direct Investment Qualities and Indicators. And this is all. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Secrétaire Générale Adjointe.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Secretary General. I'm now going to give the floor to Mrs. Barbara Kofler. Madam Secretary of State, since 2021, you've been working on a policy of international cooperation for Germany, which has been historically a champion of gender equality. And this policy has been set up by Germany very recently. Can you tell us more about how to integrate gender in funding of the fight against climate change and global warming?
Thank you very much. I also turn to English. Thank you very much for that question. And first of all, I want to thank France for the invitation and for organizing this conference, because I think it is really important in times we all face backlashes, we all face pushbacks on gender topics. It's so important to come together and reflect and see what we can do together and where we really can work together. So really thank you for that. Overall, the issue on financing is very important for us as Germany. And it's important because of two factors. The one thing is UN Women was launching facts, numbers, that if we don't do anything about financing and supporting gender equality, by 2030 we will have more than 350 million women and girls who are stuck in extreme poverty. That's one fact, I think, which makes us really, makes it really important that we act. The second fact actually would be something very positive. The World Bank recently was launching this quite interesting number that every euro or every dollar we invest in women and the capacity of participating equally in the economy, it would return by a factor of 20. So it would be the right thing to do, to invest into women and to open up access to financing for women, but it's also the smart and the most effective thing to do. And I think we have to keep that always in mind. It's not charity, it's about a really intelligent decision to support women's access to finance structures and finance architecture. My ministry is very committed to financing projects, especially through a gender lens. 93% of all our projects, all our new designed funds are having a big impact and are very much focused on being gender transformative and addressed also to the inclusion of women. That is, I think, very important in times when we see around the globe that access for women, for example, to finance is limited in very countries and very spaces. So we have to see how we really address this economic empowerment of women through our financial institutions. The Compromiso de Sevilla was mentioned, so I think we have to focus also on the international architecture and financing to enable countries around the globe to have access to financing and then do the right thing in their own domestic policy. So if you talk about financing, I'm sure we have to talk about the indebtedness of many countries and how we overcome that. We have to discuss about international taxations, about progressive taxation and raising domestic resources of many countries. So there are a lot of those technical financial issues we have to raise, but we have to raise them also then to use that money, make it use for the right investments. And those investments, and that's why I'm coming to climate financing, could be cross-cutting topics. I think it's very obvious that in many topics, it might be health, it might be climate change, it might be access to small, medium enterprises, to financing, banking, and so on. The needs of women are not addressed properly. If you look to climate financing, the needs of women and girls who are suffering from climate change are not addressed the way it should be and it could be. On the one hand, climate financing is underfinanced. I'm proud to announce that Germany still in the last year is keeping to its promise to finance the 6 billion in mitigation and adaptation on climate change, leveraging that by private sector to 12 billion, but we all know in all our countries the numbers are declining. So we have to really address both factors. And we have to address, and I think that's very relevant and also for women, the topic on adaptation. We know that the Green Climate Fund reached, I think with the adaptation portfolio, 200 million people, half of them, at least statistically, women. But we know that adaptation is underfinanced, and that is a topic where especially women could benefit from if it's addressing small and medium households, farmers, women-led businesses, around the globe. So one of those issues, I think, where we could tackle both topics, adaptation on climate change and financing gender equality at the end of the day and access to gender equality is if we all invest more in adaptation and focus that then especially to women on the ground. So last sentence, because I think we have a long round of guests and interesting interventions from the colleagues here on the panel. As what is important for my ministry, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation Development in Germany, is that we stick to our feminist development policy, and we still dare to call it like that. And I think it's important to really focus on topics like that, because at the end of the day, it was said in the first opening ceremony, there won't be real sustainable development if women are not appropriately included. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Secrétaire d'État.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary of State. And now I'm going to give the floor to Raquel Laguna Salamo, You're the Director for Gender Issues at UNDP. Now, what is the role of an international organization such as the UNDP to integrate feminist foreign policies in reforming the international architecture, and how do you guarantee a better use of international financial resources to support gender equality?
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting UNDP to this plenary, Ambassador. It's really an honor, and the question is like the question, no? You wanted to invest a lot of time in thinking and thinking together. If this forum cannot answer the question, then we need to come back and continue the conversation. So I wanted to start by saying that for UNDP, definitely at the core of the challenge is that the financial system, central elements of the financial system have been created in 1945. So in a world shaped by industrialized male-led economies, putting capital at the center rather than people or care, and before the emergence of human development agenda, before the emergence of the feminist agenda. But however, regardless of that, today it is a de facto structure and setting how we respond to problems, how capital flows. So there are many examples that you were mentioning before of the challenges that UNDP can observe and can see, like the private finance barriers that persist for women because the architecture favors large intermediaries rather than small entrepreneurships, small associations. The impact of debt distress that was mentioning just before. Today, 4 out of 5 countries are cutting budgets for education, health, and social protection and reducing their fiscal spaces. So we are here confronting a reality that women take, and they are the ones paying the bill. And we move to global tax evasion. It's also a phenomenon. Every year we lose $480 billion that can go to countries, to public expenditures. And this is draining public revenues, forcing governments many times. Everything is connected, forcing governments to apply consumption taxes that it is proven that hits harder female-headed households. So everything, it is fragmented and at the same time connected. What would a feminist reform look like? And I will try to be fast and quick, but not easy points, but relevant in our view. First of all, democratization of the global economic governance. Today, Africa's 54 countries hold only about 6.5% of the IMF voting rights. Only 3% of 24 IMF executive directors are women. This is a radical reality. Second, introduce gender-responsive debt sustainability analysis and treat health, education, care infrastructure at the core of the feminist agenda as a non-compressible economic infrastructure that cannot be discretionary add-on or remove it or delete it or reduced. Third, I think she elaborated very well about climate finance. A feminist reform would increase definitely climate finance, would prioritize grants over loans, would adapt financial instruments to ensure that financial flows are accessible and reach women at all levels, and a very long kind of, many elements here. Another dimension is the role of public finance. For UNDP, and this is something that we invest a lot, we firmly believe that we need to reclaim the role of public finance as the democratic space to determine and decide together the collective priorities of societies. And here we need to talk about reforms in the public and development banks, how they should definitely also align to the social goals and gender equality. The fifth one, I'm almost finishing, is build a fair global financial safety net. I don't know, but for sure all of you know the special drawing rights that we think that needs to be allocated according to needs and vulnerability of countries rather than linked to the economic size. And I give you an example. In 2021, Africa received less than 5% of these resources. These resources are the ones that when you are in crisis because you need to pay a lot of debt, you call and you receive some help. So imagine the disbalance. And last, the reform of the tax system for justice, the global system. We really think that we need to help countries to advance progressive taxation. But if we go to the global level, It's very impressive, the numbers. Let me share with you. This $480 billion that we lose every year can go definitely to the social agenda and the feminist agenda. So how UNDP is helping? I wanted to make it short, but we do the global advocacy and research. We are going to launch a research on debt together with the UK, but really our work is at the country level and is implementation of the civilian commitment right now. Our main priority on gender equality is public finance. We think that there is a big need for redistribution of wealth. We work in 30 countries, helping governments to reform the taxation system, eliminate gender bias of the taxation system and public expenditures. We can do a lot reducing poverty if we just review and we promote through tax reforms women entrepreneurs. We can help a lot to channel through gender budgeting this public finance and impact on the people who needs. And finally, UNDP is very committed to amplify and connect feminist economics and all the production knowledge of feminist economists and connect this to the spaces, decision-making spaces at the global, regional, and also national level and amplify the agenda. And this is something that we take very seriously. And I would like to finish, I hope I'm doing well with the time, by emphasizing that we need to reclaim finance as a public good that serves people and planet, not just capital. Finance must move from the logic of extraction to the logic of care. And we think that this network of feminist foreign policy officials and committed officials that we have here, I'm very impressed with the panel and with people this morning analyzing this, everything, is essential for this transformation. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. That's a lot of homework. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now turning to Faye Machekid, who is co-director, co-executive director of OIDA. In the field, feminist movements and organizations are the first to feel the brunt of the rollback by anti-rights movements, and now, after they've been underfunded, they're suffering historical funding cuts. So how can feminist movements and organizations take advantage of this reform of international financial architecture? And how can the financial institutions represented here and the states here mainstream these feminist movements in this reform? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ministers, distinguished guests, all protocols observed, and my women's rights colleagues, thank you, and thank you, Ambassador, for inviting us on this panel. Feminists have always understood that financial architecture is not neutral, nor is it balanced. As I sat here and listened to the commitments, I was actually almost jumping out of my chair. I was so excited. The reality, however, is what we have on the ground, and that's that from the data of AWOD, which from our report called Where is the Money for Feminist Organizing Research, which researched over 1,100 organizations in 128 countries. The data showed that the median annual budget for these respondents was $22,000 US. Try and work that into your individual budget, and you'll see that it doesn't actually cost, it doesn't actually mean anything in terms of expenditure. 15% of these respondents operate with budgets above $100,000 US, and just 5% exceed 1 million. It's a lot of figures. 81% of respondents rely on some form of autonomous resourcing, because the truth is the funding has never been enough. And 29% rely on self-generated resourcing. Yet they are the ones sustaining communities through climate disasters, through democracy breakdowns, and they are the first at the scene. In contrast, 3 global anti-rights organizations, the Christian Broadcasting Network, Focus on Family, and Alliance Defending Freedom, receive twice as much as all the feminist movements surveyed in this report. Twice as much as 1,174 organizations. This is not an equity issue. It's economic inefficiency. Feminist movements already deliver what economists call public goods: stability, protection, care, and education. They prevent crises that cost billions later, but it's clear from the data I've just given you that they are operating on shoestring budgets. A feminist reform of global finance would do more than correct historic imbalances. It would redefine what we mean by economic stability and progress. The litmus test is very easy. The question is, does a feminist financial architecture serve life over profit? It means alternative financial models that shift from a military-based political economy to one that defends humanity itself. It means centering reparative and redistributive justice, ensuring that those that have historically carried the burdens of extraction and debt can finally shape the terms of recovery. We know that where feminist movements are strong, peace agreements last longer, public trust grows, and economic recovery is more resilient. The International Labour Organization estimates that investing in the care economy could generate 300 million jobs by 2035. Closing gender gaps in labor participation could increase GDP by 35%. That's not ideology, that is sound economics. Why now? Because the current world system is broken. We've been hearing it throughout. And it's so broken that it's ridiculous. And I say this because global South countries are spending more on debt repayment than on health and education combined. Only 1% of ODA reaches feminist and women's rights organizations. It was never enough to start off with. Even though they are the first responders of social and political crises, this is not a fiscal gap. It is a governance failure. The finance institutions designed to stabilize economies now too often reproduce instability through conditionalities that deepen inequality and debt that erodes social spending. A feminist relationship with financial institutions would shift the conversation from aid codependency to co-ownership and shared priorities. I know that you're looking at me for time, so I'm going to try and skip some of this. Yeah. To make this possible, a three-tiered partnership is proposed: political will, civil society, and financial institutions would be required. This is a bankable proposition. It calls for global financial governance that aligns with sustainable development goals, but goes further to embed peace, democracy, and equality as true indicators of stability. We have proof that this partnership works. Financial institutions and feminist movements have worked together with government. We see this in the example of Equality Fund in Canada, which brings together government, philanthropy, and civil society. It blends capital investment with feminist grant making, ensuring that capital flows are shaped by those who understand inequality firsthand, ensuring feminist accountability in every dollar invested. It's very simple. The principles are following the money. The partnership with finance institutions have showed that even the most powerful financial actors are held to account. When BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, began to frame itself as a champion of ESG investing, feminists analyzed this data and called out the contradictions. Enough so that there was scrutiny and the shareholders had to look at this. The public challenge led to pressure and police policy scrutiny. And these examples show that feminist movements can engage global finance, not only as adversaries, but as partners, truth-telling partners capable of aligning capital with conscience. When reproductive justice system collapses, when care systems crumble, when climate emergencies uproot millions, economies suffer, not just individuals. I think I want to say that this is urgent. The reforming of financial infrastructure is not starting now when ODA is decreasing. It started before, and it is time that we move from inaction to action. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Some support in the room. Bertrand
Valkener, you are Assistant Director General of AFD. The network of development banks presided over by the director of AFD was very involved in the Paris Summit for a New Global Pact 2 years ago. Why would you say that the support of AFC and similar organizations is vital for this reform of international financial architecture?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Excellency and members of the panel. I'm going to speak French, so I'm looking at all of you to see if you're wearing your headsets. So, dear guests, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today to represent a bank which you might think that is a bit specific. It's a bit weird that a financial institution or bank would participate in this kind of conference. But the topic is at the same time very individual and at the same time very institutional. As the minister said in her introductory speech, gender equality is something we're thinking of for our children and something we live with on a day-to-day basis. And personally, it took me 8 years. It took me 8 years for me to join the French Development Agency and work with the teams present in this room to realize that the 5 postcards I had bought in Cameroon years ago, representing women working, with somebody cutting wood, somebody carrying water, somebody sowing a field, somebody carrying animals or food and cattle. Actually, I realized that on the postcards, all of these people working were women. And I had not realized at the time that what we are working today in the agricultural projects we are working on today aim, or many of them aim, to take into account this specificity that in many countries we work with, women are the ones working in agriculture. They're the ones sowing, planting, herding the cattle, going to collect water from the well, and they need to work with all these constraints. So this is a transformation that I went through personally, and this is something I see in our institution. Since at management level, we have reached gender parity. 50% have men and women in our managerial pool, and this was done under the aegis of the Director General of the FDA, Rémi Rio, who, when he joined the agency in 2016, gave a very specific orientation to the agency. He wanted to have a 50-50 representation, because at the time the gender equality was far from reached. And so these efforts carried on for 8 years, and we're still working on it. So there are still pay inequalities between the pay, the salary of men and women. And the trajectory is what we're following and what we've committed to in our projects. And we've committed to carry out with this diplomacy of supporting women and girls. This is a very clear commitment made by France, renewed recently, and Minister Barrot reminded us there this morning. Minister Carnoy said so today. And this is one of the strong values of our country. As a bilateral development bank, we're very proud and committed to carry it out. So these are projects that our teams at the FDA have been working on. How, for example, working on the construction of an underground, how women drivers would be trained. For example, in the cities, there were no women driving underground trains. So it was also an objective to work with micro credit agencies for women to get funding for developing their business. And this we worked on with the agricultural authorities of different countries so that women could be owners of their plot of land, which is something they couldn't do, that was not allowed so far because of cultural practices. And things are changing, not fast enough, but we're working on it. And I have many examples, like the clinic of Dr. Vanzi in DRC, treating women who've suffered violences during the ethnic conflicts in Congo. I'm mentioning all of these examples to show you how, in a very organized way, we try in the field of environment to fight climate change, fight things in agriculture, farming, transportation, banking, and all that, those different fields, how we are working. I would like to pay tribute to the OECD because there are markers, CAT 1, CAT 2, that were initiated by the National Assembly in France, and the Bill of Law passed on August the 4th, 2025. These markers, CAT 1 and CAT 2, are structuring elements in the activities we carry out, and then the obligation we have to make sure that our projects have a component that deals with gender equality, that takes gender into account, or CAT 2, those projects whose main objective is to provide an answer to a specific kind of problem relating to gender equality. So, thank you very much to the OECD for carrying on in that direction. Now, today, we are very worried. We're very concerned because of the drop in funding all over. We've seen this occurring right away and very brutally in education and in health. There are two sectors in which we've mostly been focusing with our projects with the CAT 2 label, focusing on gender equality and focusing on women's rights. It's education and health. For education, educating girls, setting up structures to ensuring the sexual and reproductive health and rights, and in the countries of the Sahel region for treating women who've suffered violences. The fact that there is no more funding today, or much less funding, in the sectors of health and education is absolutely terrible for those countries who benefited most from that. And it's terrible for the populations, the women and girls from those countries who beforehand had seen things moving ahead, and there's a terrible backlash now. So we need to mobilize on those matters. And what we are doing as a development bank, we do so with the platform you mentioned, Madam, a common platform with 540 development banks, public development banks, to make sure that the two markers initiated by OECD, CAT 1 and CAT 2, is no longer a tool that is restricted to OECD member countries, but that we can roll it out to whichever project there is, and to other development banks that are not banks which belong to OECD. This is a concrete example that goes to show how we can transform the funding provided by these institutions and through the co-funding projects that are done by the agency and others funding institutions, how these projects can take gender into account in the funding of sort of an underground project or anything else. Our expertise developed at the agency, how we can inject it into the agenda of these financial institutions. The Seville summit was very interesting to carry out our agenda, and we hope to go further. In Germany, it's the KW, in the Netherlands, it's the FMO. The Dutch DFI, who's been working with us on the matters, a major funding partner with the 2X challenge, the reference of the private sector in matters of gender equality. So we're going to carry on trying to pool all these energies, and you can count on the agency to carry on pushing France and pushing the agenda. And I can see a member of parliament here. I know that you'll be able to count on the support of the national agency to carry on working in that direction. So once again, thank you all very, very much for what we've done so far, managed to do so far altogether. Thank you for your mobilization. Thank you for your presence today. And last word, while we have a conclusion, is we still need you to move forward. Okay, we are going in the right direction, but we still need you. We need to mobilize funds and we need to mobilize expertise. So we'll carry on needing you all to go and find in all of the sectors in which we work different ways of meeting our objectives, ideas or innovations to reach gender equality in the countries in which we've been working. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And in conclusion of the panel, it's our pleasure to welcome Stephen Communs, who is Vice Minister for International Cooperation in the Netherlands. Historically, the Netherlands have allocated a large part of ODA to gender equality. And you are a long-standing partner of feminist organizations. Many donors have cut back. This reform of financial architecture is a priority. How does a traditional donor like you take up position vis-à-vis this reform of international financial architecture to make sure that gender equality is always and still funded?
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us in this long day. And I think that's the spirit of this movement we are in and we should be in. And I thank France for taking the helm this year. I think we all see and hear also in the panels, in this panel as well, that we face a phase of big transition where things need to change in order to maintain and maybe restore even balance in the world. And this phase of transition creates uncertainty, uncertainty also in the domestic side. And you ask us as a traditional donor, and I think it's fair to say that also in the Netherlands, that uncertainty also translates into the political arena, into debates about priorities, into debates about narratives, and into debates about where to put your fiscal space and where not. So we have to be honest about that. And maybe a small example and concrete example is that we are all, and I would call you all, those who are sitting on the fence still, we are all very enthusiastic about the political statement which you convened for this conference. And I think it's very important to put the principles right and to have this political statement. So we signed this statement wholeheartedly. At the same time, I was sitting with my two sons on the dinner table in the weekend, and they asked me what I do in this strange world, and I explained this political statement. And there's one thing about masculinity and about male behavior, male agency. And it made me realize how far my reality is from theirs. And these are just children, you could say. But at the same time, it's also a reality which I meet in my work. So there is a big distance between what we do with our privileged positions and what other people experience in their roles and their positions. Now, what does that lead to for us, going to your question and trying to be quite brief? So it means that we have been challenged on our ODA envelope, and there will be elections next week, and we will see what that will bring. Within that challenge, we have to try to do the right things. And what do I mean by that? We have capped the budget expenditures for asylum seekers in the Netherlands to 10%. This was going up from 25 to 50%. We have capped ODA for that expenditure, and it was an extra budgetary expenditure. It's important because it saves money for ODA. Secondly, we have kept the Ukraine expenditures out of our ODA envelope. That's important as well, I think. We create space in the ODA envelope. Thirdly, we have very clearly said, the current government has clearly said at the beginning of their term, we will defend the international consensus on all fronts, meaning including on gender. Fourthly, we have committed to climate finance, and we stick to that commitment. 60% of the Dutch climate financing is adaptation, because I agree that is actually putting women first. And then we have looked into how can we be smarter in our ODA. And one point, but it has been said here, so I'm not going to dwell on it, is how to actually use it for leveraging investment. And that's not an easy one. It's not necessarily blending leads to and so forth. But it can happen. And if you just realize that 1 out of 4 women in Africa starts an enterprise, and 98% have 100%, 98% of these women pay back 100% of their loans, then it's a perception of risk. That's all. So if we can take away that risk perception just by demonstrating that this money works for women and for enterprise and for economies, then we are there. So that's why we proudly, jointly with France and others and Germany, invested into this AFAWA program, and we took lessons learned of that program. And then finally, we also need grants, and it has been said here as well. So last week we launched a 210 million grant program for feminist organizations in the Global South. And we built on one of the key lessons we have been learning in civil society support over the past 5 years. And it is almost a cliche to say, but we are nowhere near yet. And that is how to transfer agency to the beneficiaries. And feminist organizations in the Global South, they require agency in these funds. So we try to design this fund, which is focusing on female entrepreneurs, on the role of women in peace and security, and on gender-based violence. We try to focus it on the agency of the beneficiaries, which is in the jargon we all use, locally led. So that's I think a big thing we launched last week. And then maybe finally, please, if you can, well, thank you. It's you all to applaud for this because you rallied for this, right? So, and the last thing, if you can, please advocate also for flexible contributions. It's essential, not only for the UN, for every receiving. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Vice.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Just a few quick words of conclusion because it's late. What do we take away from this? We've had recommendations, we've had suggestions. People have talked about feminist reforms. It doesn't mean adding gender, it means rethinking our priorities and governance methods. And what we're trying to do with this international strategy for feminist foreign policies is a feminist reform of the international financial architecture means putting women and girls at the heart of economic decisions. And in this process of transformation, participation and inclusion of the feminist civil society is vital. This reform means the state setting up innovative financial partners, and financial players have to get together and get involved both severally and collectively. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, the panelists. Thank you, the audience, for staying so long, the end of this long day.
Thank you for sticking until quite late. We will meet again for those who are up early tomorrow at 8:30 for the first sessions in the concurrent sessions, and then the first plenary starts at 9:30. Thank you very much.